I started with these examples of two popes of the ancient times, because there are very few examples of popes whose teaching has been considered heretic or very strongly questioned. When in the case of Honorius, he was formally condemned for heresy, and Liberius was also accused of signing a heretic formula during a time. And since now is there a big talk about doctrines somehow implied in what Pope Francis says in Amoris Laetitia, and somehow implied in his actions, what he says in interviews, what he lets other people who are close to him say. So there's a strong debate about the Pope's heterodoxy. I think many people have said that the document is ambiguous, and so you can, if you wish, you can interpret it in an orthodox way. But I think that's not quite the case, because I think it's not correct to say the document is really ambiguous. Instead, the document is indirect. It says things in an indirect way, but clearly, so the reader gets very clearly the message, and it's not ambiguous at all. My impression is that the text, the writer of the text, there are different hypotheses on who really wrote the text, but anyway, the writer skillfully avoids directly saying things that are contrary to dogma. For example, to the dogma of infallibility of indissolubility of marriage, or objectivity of moral law and moral action. But really what is implied in the whole discourse is very clear, and really runs against very important dogmatic articles of the faith. That it's unjust to say that, for example, bishops that are now saying in their guidelines that, for example, divorced and remarried couples can go to communion, that they are misinterpreting Amoris Laetitia, so as if it was their fault. Yes. I think it makes much more sense that they are really getting the real meaning of the text. And this is counterproved by the fact that the Pope himself approves of their guidelines, so there's no possible doubt about this. So I don't think it's a question only of asking if the Pope has made any formally heretic statement. The problem is that the whole of his action and speech goes in that direction, so that claims for a correction, as Cardinal Burke has said, and we all hope he really is going to carry out that. Yes. I think there's a similarity in as much a relativity of the moral law is implied, because when Jesus speaks and makes a point against the Pharisees, for example, when he criticized the Pharisees about sticking to the law, then I think it's very important to distinguish that he's speaking of a positive law in contrast to divine natural law. So what Jesus is criticizing in the Pharisees is their excessive attachment to positive law and forgetting about natural law. So when the text speaks without distinction that there are people, modern Pharisees, who stick to the law without distinction between moral law and positive law, then there's a big confusion in this. And so, because if you speak against if you speak against natural law, then you are speaking against the very person of Christ, because the divine person of Christ is the very mind that gives things their natural law. So of course, to say that Christ is somehow criticizing or relativizing moral law, natural law, is like saying that Christ is speaking against himself, because he's the author of that law and never doubts it. So as Pope Benedict said, this is the first thing he asks the disciple, the rich young person that goes to him and says, may I follow you? And then the first thing Jesus says, follow the commandments. So because this is the first thing he requires of a disciple, it cannot be relativized. I think it's unprecedented in as much as the doctrinal confusion has been published in a pontifical document. So that's really unprecedented. I think neither the case of Liberius or Honorius or John the 22nd can be a parallel for that. I think paralleling that is just to say that you can't parallel. It's not really comparable, because, for example, in the time of Liberius, the Trinitarian formula was not completely established, so the theological language was still in process. But now, in a pontifical document, statements cannot come out that are contrary to previous well-established magisterium and founded in tradition. So that this reaches the papal magisterium is really something unprecedented. I would say more, it's something apocalyptic. It reminds me of the prayer Leo XIII put in the Missal, when he says that somehow this diabolical confusion one day will reach the See of Peter. Yeah. So it's really, in this sense, unprecedented. It's probable that a correction comes out. We don't know exactly where from. Maybe Cardinal Burke, but we don't know. Maybe some other person, but I think people are now going in that direction. Maybe they're not going to be cardinals, we don't know. Yes. But somehow, I think in this kind of correction, the grade in the church, the status, is not that relevant as has been. Of course, it has force if it comes from a cardinal, but it's not strictly necessary, because any inferior in such an important danger for faith and morals, any inferior can say the truth and tell, and would be correcting the Pope, although being a little child, because in some way, because if he's saying the truth, then he's saying the truth to the Pope. I think it's also a duty of charity as to the Pope, because somehow Christ tells us we have to have this charity of correcting who we think is wrong. Yeah. Yeah. Not just trying to say, well, we do it another way, but we don't say he's doing it wrong. Then this would be hypocritical. I think that's very important. I think that because it's important that the truth be said. Of course, if there are academic qualifications, is good too, but I think the important thing is that the truth is actually said. And not just disguised in a way that we say, well, we are content to follow orthodoxy, but not saying that an error is being taught. That is only half of the duty we have. So I think many bishops are in this, making only half their duty, because it's very good you teach orthodoxy in your diocese, but if you don't say there's an error, then in the other diocese they will say, well, then you do it this way. You just confirm it's relative, that some can do it one way and others another way, and it's no problem. So you're really relativizing the issue. I hope it can be a matter of reflection for the cardinals themselves, that may encourage them to go ahead with this correction, because I think that it's a duty of them, once they've said this and once they've posited the dubia, it's just staying half the way, not to go ahead, because the dubia really, as I said before, really are affirmations, because they're asking if something in the magisterium is still in vigor, but this should be obvious. So just go on and say explicitly, well, something is being told and done by the Pope which is against the magisterium, and that's a fact. Unless someone can refute it, but no one has really refuted that. So I think it's mainly, my hope is that this can be a reflection for cardinals, but also bishops and also more lay academics to go on and say the whole truth about this, and not only half.